Welcome back, everybody. It's non-Malazan Sunday, and rather late at that, but anyway, I'm here to talk about something that is not Malazan. And today I want to talk about a book, one of my favorite fantasy trilogies, I guess. We're going to talk about the first one today. I'm going to do probably another video on the second and maybe even one on the third book at some point. I'm currently rereading it. The story is The Steel Remains. That's volume 1 of the Land Fit for Heroes trilogy by Richard K. Morgan. And it's gonna be grim and maybe even dark and full of rage, and I'm all for that. Alright, so let's do that. Cheers. It doesn't even pop properly. Damn. Anyway. So yeah. I'm gonna keep it as spoiler-free as possible for the first part, and then I'm gonna go into the spoilers and explain more why I do enjoy this book so much and actually the entire series so much. But first, quickly, Richard K. Morgan is mostly an author famous for fantasy, for science fiction stories. He's written like a bunch of standalone, like one standalone story at this point called Market Forces, which is weird and fun. And he's written a duology, I guess, so far, or maybe it's an ongoing series about some kind of private detective, what have ya, kind of thing, called the series. I don't know. The series actually has a name. It was like 13 or Black Man. That title changed between the British edition and the US edition of the book. And Thin Air, that was like, I feel his last novel, unless I've missed one. And the like a trilogy of sort of cyberpunkish sci-fi novels around his character Takeshi Kovacs, and that one was turned into a TV series by, like a TV show by, I guess, Netflix? Maybe? I don't know. Probably Netflix. And the series was called Altered Carbon. I have not seen the series. I've read all those books. I really enjoy all of them for a bunch of reasons that I will explain later on. And between, yeah, after finishing that Takeshi Kovacs series, he went, or like trilogy of novels, maybe there will be more in the future, I don't know. He went and decided to write a trilogy of epic fantasy novels, bringing his very distinct style to that genre. And The Steel Remains is the first one of those. It was back at the time reviewed by Joe Abercrombie, who called it like the darkest thing he has ever read, which might tell you something about the story. It also has, this is important for me, it has one of the best opening lines for a fantasy book that I've ever read. It's just, establishes tone really well, and that's going to be one of the reasons why I enjoy the entire thing so much. But yeah, that first line just absolutely slays. And it is, if a man you know to be of sound character has told you his recently deceased mother has climbed in through his window and tried to eat him, you basically have two options. Now it's like, I think it's, you have two basic options. That's the one. I'm quoting from like memory here, so that, anyway, you have two basic options. One, you can check his pulse, look at his eyes, smell his breath to check if he has ingested something nasty. Or two, you can believe him. And yeah, things go downhill from there on. Anyway, so let's give a rough outline of what this first novel is about. It follows three different characters, three different viewpoint characters that all fought together in a war half a decade or decade ago, and deal with the aftermath of that, with the trauma of that war in different ways. So and then are involved in some new happenings that kind of make them cross paths again. That's like the very, very, very raw outline. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple of aspects of this, so will not yet be spoilery. And those are aspects that I think make me like this book so much. First of all, the language is once again is marvelous. It's a rather modern language for a fantasy book. I mean, we've seen that before with someone like George R. R. Martin starting the whole idea of fantasy characters can use fuck a lot, and then you have your Scott Lynch's and Joe Abercrombie's doing the same. And then Richard K. Morgan comes along, and holy shit, does he like to swear. The I have not counted the amounts of times fuck is used in that book, but it is a lot. It is a lot all the time. But the general sense of the language is a rather modern one, like a sort of dry humor in a way. So something that people that like Joe Abercrombie or Scott Lynch style of prose might enjoy here as well. There's a lot of dry humor in this and all of that. It's a very sleek kind of prose that Richard K. Morgan uses here, and people who have read some of his other books might recognize it from there as well. So he basically used the same language for an epic fantasy that he also would use for a sci-fi novel or a sort of cyberpunkish novel, and I feel that's good because it's refreshing. So yeah, there's that. That's like the first thing that I really, really enjoy about the book. The language is good. The next thing is the entire story, at least in this first novel of the trilogy, is crafted incredibly well. Like the overall, like the pacing, all of that, it's incredibly well structured and takes exactly enough time for all the things that he wants to do. And that's, once again, very well done. Just like, it's very, very, sleek, all of that. It's not much more to say about it. The overall arches of the characters, all of that works incredibly well. So that's another thing there. This is someone who really knows what they're doing that rather well. So there's that. The next bit that I personally enjoy a lot about this book is the idea how it, deals with certain aspects of, like, how it plays with tropes and traditions of the fantasy field. So you have your celebrated heroes. All of our three characters are celebrated war heroes, right? And usually a lot of our fantasy stories end with that, both people being celebrated heroes. You follow them through the war and see how they become heroes and all of that. And no one ever asks about what kind of price does that actually cost to become a hero, to live through a war. It's something that a lot of fantasy doesn't ask. Obviously, you go read your books by authors that have actually been in wars. In fantasy, I guess the one where you get it mostly would be something like Glenn Cook's Black Company, that has a lot of this like survivor thing going on near the end, but those characters are still sort of at war, right? They're still a mercenary company near the end of those 10 books. Oh, that's 10? I think it's 10 or 12. I keep forgetting. But yeah, not a lot of fantasy deals with the questions of, your PTSD or whatever, like all these psychological traumas that being in a war actually leaves with people. As I said, like, you read your sci-fi books, your Slaughterhouse-5 and stuff like that. There you deal a lot with war trauma because it's written by people who lived through wars and know that that's not fun. But so yeah, to ask the question of What happens after the big epic war? What happens to our characters after that? Is on the first level something that I personally really enjoy. The next, like this sort of thinking outside the box, going around that. The next one is obviously how to say, how it deals with how Morgan actively tries to deal with expectations and conventions of the genre. So he has three main heroes here. They're like Arkath, a sort of half elf, although these elves are more like actually more like dwarves because they deal with mechanism and stuff. So a half mixed species, whatever character, female, Arkath. And then you have Agar, who is an older herdsman, northern barbarian type of guy, and you have Ringil, the actual like sort of main character, who is the glorious, young, good-looking war hero, and he's gay, and that's important. Because sexual orientation is something that has for a lot of time, for a long time, been rather a like in fantasy has a long time been rather traditional. You have your damsels in distress, you have your Conans rescuing scantily clad girls all the time, and all of that. It has been a very straight heterosexual genre for a long time. And Morgan's idea was to, change that up, because maybe it also means that a lot of its readership might be rather conservative when it comes to these to topics of sexuality. And he got a lot of hate mail for it. He published some of that openly on his blog to make fun of people hating him for writing about a gay main character. And yeah, I mean, more power to him for that. I just really enjoyed that. The next bit is how he mixes up tropes of fantasy in other aspects. As I said, there's sort of elf-like characters and sort of dwarf-like characters who are nothing like that, but take some of these aspects that we usually associate with them, like more magical in the elf side of things, more mechanical, scientifically inclined in the dwarf side of things, or gnomes or what have you, depending on where you get your tropes from. And he kind of turns those on their head. The next bit is how he deals with religion and the question of gods. I'm not going to go too deeply into that in the spoiler-free part of it. And how he mixes fantasy and technology and science fiction in his story, because the question still is, is this a fantasy book or is it a science fiction book? And it's kind of hard to tell, like on a meta-fictional level. Once you think about it, it's kind of hard to tell. And he does all of these things rather well, but really the main thing is you read that book, it's an absolute fucking page turner with really well done speed. Right? There's so much adrenaline in that writing and in that story that pounds along all the time. You just want to keep on reading, keep on reading, keep on reading these dialogues. You cheer those characters on while they make really dumb decisions and so forth. And it's just really, really well told as a story. And now we come to the last big thing that I find that I personally really, really enjoy about this book. It's a very angry book. Now we're going to get a bit political here, so don't worry. But Morgan is a rather left-leaning person from what you can tell. And he does something that you see a lot in Grimdark. He paints a rather dark picture, or you might call it a realistic picture of the world. There's slavery, there's a lot of religious bigotry and zealotry going on. There is all of that stuff. And he points it out a lot. Like, everything is fucked up and people are ground down by the fucking system all the fucking time. And he makes you angry while reading that. And then you have his characters who just sometimes at least manage to go up against that, and it's a pure revenge fantasy in some part where like, yeah, then I just fucking burn down the entire fucking place. It doesn't work like that all the time, but the rage that drives this narrative is something that I personally appreciate a lot, because not only because I do lean in the same way politically from my personal parts, but just the fact that there's so much rage and energy in that writing, the constant raging, violent raging against the injustices of the world that drive this book make it absolutely riveting to read. And that's like the last big part here that I want to talk about in the spoiler-free part. So be warned, if you read this book, and I really hope you do, because I feel it's one of the best dark fantasy things out there, a very valuable addition to that series. Like if you like your Abercrombies, if you like your Scott Lynch's, if you even like your George R. R. Martin or whatever, this one is a quick read. It's rather short for a fan, not short, but it's rather short-ish for a fantasy story, epic fantasy story. But it has a lot to offer and may actually help, broaden the horizon and show what is possible within the genre of epic fantasy if you just bring enough anger, rage, and yeah, mostly rage to the table. And that's just a lot of, that's great. And that's something that I really, really, really enjoy about, because I'm an angry man. What can I do? And yeah. There is that, but once again, be warned, there is very explicit sexuality. There's a lot of violence in there, but actually not that much violence, but once there is violence, it's described in gory detail. And yes, all the sex in there, not all the sex, but almost all the sex in there is gay sex. So if that offends you, well, that's your problem. I'm just going to say that's in there, and I think it's great to have it in there, because we need more of that until it's completely normalized, is what I'm trying to say. And as long as people still get upset by that, I guess there's still enough need for this kind of book. So there's all of that, and I feel that more people should read it, because it's a lot of fun, and it makes you angry at the world, and being angry at the world is actually good most of the time. All right, so that's the spoiler-free part. I'll now talk about stuff that actually goes a bit more into the details of the story and stuff like that. All right. So, what do I also like about this story and feel is important to look at? That is less, that has actual impact on the story. I feel the way the entire story is set up, once again, how he handles the way these different narratives, like the different three characters kind of meet up and all of that, works well. The next big thing that I personally really enjoy is the question of, are these gods or not? There's that Clarke, Arthur C. Clarke quote of magic, advanced technology is appearing like magic. That's definitely something that plays a lot into this book, because when Takavach or Kelgris, the gods of the North, basically show up, they usually you can never tell. That could also all be done by extremely good technology, and this is, I guess, like the big one that I don't know if he's ever officially answered it, but basically, there's a few hints, I guess, that the Steel Remains and all these stories take place in the same universe as the Takeshi Kovacs books, because Takavach, the god, is a very rough version of Takeshi Kovacs, and Kelgris, Queen of the Falcons. Now, when you read the Altered Carbon stuff, there's Kelgris Falcon, all right? So it could all be in the same world, just this is like a super primitive planet where the Envoy... Is it Envoy Corps? I keep forgetting. It's been ages since I read those books. I think it's Envoy Corps, like, where they play gods to steer civilization in a way or something, or just play at being gods. So there's that aspect, which, once again comes into the whole question of, is it sci-fi or is it fantasy? And he does that a lot. I mean, it gets even more like that in later now, in like the second and third novel. But once again, you have these aspects of the Kirith technology with these ships that go through the like to parallel dimensions or whatever through the earth, these fire ships. And that's a really cool technology already, right? Even though it's never really properly described. But anyway, they have their helmsmen who seem to be computers with artificial intelligence, or you can read it that way. That's the interesting thing there. Then another part that I feel he does really well is the the Empire and the character of the Emperor. How he does, like, the idea of his father being this war hero, this warlike yeah, basically this warrior who expands the empire and so forth, and how he is now trying to actually, pacify, not pacify, but actually keep the peace and come down, or slowly lead the empire down from the war, from the idea of war, basically, and this rather extreme expansionist outlook, and how he tries to actually lead that down. That's a very interesting thing to do, because once again, it's an interesting portrayal of an emperor, which is probably much closer to the reality than anything we usually see in a lot of fantasy. He's not a noble king. He's just trying to, enjoy his life while sort of making sure that things work out. That's cool. The enormous amount of drug abuse in this book is just also, once again, like, everyone is basically all the time high or drunk, while committing acts of violence. And that's just interesting, because it's described as something rather normal, even though it's illegal, as people just do it. It's like the motivations are very human. It's like you have these authors of a lot of, like, grimdark, who sort of claim, or what they call grimdark, who sort of claim that they are portraying a more realistic look at reality in their fantasy worlds. But very few go to the levels that Morgan goes here in this book when he shows up, when he, like, the motivations of the different characters are all basically sorted. The way the society works is, he goes a bit further in the whole idea of showing how corrupt everything is, and I guess that might just be because he has identified the drive of humans to make money in a pseudo-capitalist society as a problem, and is very unflinchingly looking at that. So there's an underlying idea that kind of makes it easier, I guess, to look at that. To portray things realistically, or in realistic is obviously a stupid word, like in a way that we as readers can connect to, because it feels realistic, because we see that every day in our own lives. There's that. Also, yeah, the idea of debt slavery and stuff like that. Yeah. Grim, but it's there. Also, the idea of morality, bigotry, like the way he portrays that in those scenes with Ringil and Merman Card, and how everyone basically hates him, not for his, like, bigotry, but just for his lower birth, and that being a class thing. The snob. It's like, the guy is an asshole, and everyone should hate him, but they hate him for the wrong reasons, because everyone else is also idiots and snobs and assholes, and that's that, like, everything is fucked up, and why don't you just burn the whole place down? And then you don't, because it's about the humans, about the humanity. These fucking humans, as he puts it so well. I really, really enjoy that. Then the way he sort of twists the The monomyth, I keep going back to that, and I feel bad about it. The way, like, Ringel goes on that kind of hero's journey. Basically, I guess all three do, but mostly Ringel goes on that hero's journey. He's actually taken into this other world and has all these experiences there, and he comes out and he's scarred for life, like visibly on his face, obviously, but also his soul has changed, and you have this this like prophecy at the beginning is like a dark lord is rising, and then at the end, when after he kills Grace of Heaven, and he's like, in the epilogue, a dark lord is rising, right? And then it turns out that he might just be that dark lord that is rising and no one else, right? So the way that is handled is just so good, because it once again takes that kind of trope and turns it on his head in a very distinct way. So yeah, there's that aspect. Then the rather complex relationship between Seedlore, the Duenda slash elf kind of character, and Ringil is another thing that I find very interesting. Because you have that weird like sexual tension between the two, and obviously all the sex. But how it switches, and how he manages to show the inhuman, in a way, but only in a way. That's the sad part there. The inhuman way of thinking, or how morality has slipped away. Especially near the end, when they're talking about the idea, like when Seedlore is describing the planned ritual sacrifices of all those marsh dwellers, and it's so calculating and stripped of morality. And I feel that's a strength there, because a lot of times in a lot of fantasy books, not all of them, but in quite a few, where you have more than just humans, but other species, intelligent species that are like characters. A lot of those are just, caricatures, like humans with funny ears or beards or whatever, and exaggerated traits, character traits in a way. Like all the dwarves are grumpy, all the elves are like hippies that are tree hugging all the time. The cliches, right? But the point is, he managed to actually make them just inhuman and alien in a way. And that I feel is also just really well done, and I appreciate that, because it's like, yeah, maybe that's just it. They're just not human. They don't think in those ways. But the way he kind of turns it around near the end is like, oh, maybe they were human earlier, and they've just gone beyond that, and are like sort of post-human, and humanity is on the way to that place where we have left all morality behind. You kind of harkens to that whole like Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft place, where it says like the great old ones will lead us into that place where morality doesn't matter, and the Holocaust of ecstasy and freedom, as they say so nicely in the Call of Cthulhu. He kind of hints that way. So there's that. Also, how to say, the way he manages to get that sort of dreamlike quality of the Eldraine marches, of the Grey Places, this elf land, whatever, works really well. And it has this psychedelic feel to me when I read it, and I really appreciated that. Also, I don't know, it's just, there's very, very few inconsistencies that I found in there, which once again, is like, that's great. I feel like the only real error is this is obviously way too late, but it just stuck out to me to me today. It's like when Takamach saves Egar from his brothers, he snatches that arrow out of the air, and breaks it. And then later, when Egar tells the story to the Throne Eternal people, and he's like, "Yeah, he stopped a crossbow bolt." No, that wasn't a crossbow bolt. That was a fucking arrow. There's a difference, but that might just slip through. Anyway, as I said, there's very few inconsistencies in this first book. The overall way it starts slow. You have all these people trying to deal with their trauma. All of them like always find violence the first, or at least the second way to deal with everything. Everyone is at the edge all the time. That just works so well. Because yeah, they're heroes and everyone thinks they're heroes, at least most of the time. But they're all three of them are basically broken people, because you don't become a hero by being by being sane, I guess, in a way. And it leaves damage, and that's what I really appreciate about that. Plus, obviously, that just gut feeling of when mostly Ringil just fucks up people because they deserve it. They fucking deserve it, and the whole system is rotten, and he feels that, and he just goes and does it. It's that kind of thing that I guess drives all kinds of revenge fantasies in a way. But it's cool to have that acted out and written out in a fantasy setting. So I'm all for that. I guess that's it for today. I just wanted to say, yeah, go read that book. It's so good, and I feel, for whatever reason, way too few people actually have read that story. Go read The Steel Remains. If you enjoy your Abercrombie, this is sort of going to the next level, I guess. Or at least on the same level for me. So, yeah. Go read that and see how Grimdark can actually work when it's not just a cynical depiction of the real world, but actually has the rage to actually, where you can feel that it doesn't flinch away. I guess that's like my takeaway. It's like why I feel it's better than Grimdark. Where Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen offers hope and catharsis. This one definitely also offers catharsis, but it also is very much like, yeah, this is the world. It's fucked up, and we should do something about it. We should fucking change it. It doesn't just portray it as like, yeah, you can't change anything. Yes, you could just, go and burn it down. Maybe that'll help. I do appreciate that. So yeah, if you want to get some rage at the system in and enjoy really well written action scenes or very explicit gay sex, then go read this book. It's really worth it. Trust me, it's really fucking worth it. All right, anyway, have a great Sunday night, and I'll talk to you tomorrow about Malazan. Until then, cheers.